headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador. I am Estefania Bravo. This is From the South. Today we begin in South Africa, where the largest trade union, COSATU, has staged a national strike to protest against high unemployment. Thousands of workers marched through the streets of Johannesburg to decry government's economic policies, which they say have failed to create jobs and are deepening poverty. South Africa's unemployment rate is at around 27%.
We are sending a message to the prophet of within ourselves.
Our correspondent Matuba Mahlatjie has been out with the strikers and sent us this report.
Members of the Congress for South Africa's trade unions are gathering here in Johannesburg at what is called the Mary Fitzgerald Square. We're expecting hundreds and hundreds of their members who have not gone to work today. So members affiliated to this trade union will not be showing up for work today, which is expected to also cause a disruption. The reason behind the demonstration or the protests here by COSATU is to tell government we want more jobs, because unemployment in South Africa accounts to about 27%. So 27% of the population, high amongst them is the youth, are jobless, and the Congress for South Africa's trade union is asking government to create more jobs, and this is the reason behind this protest that you see behind us. So in all nine South Africa's provinces, there will be protests like this. So we are now in Gauteng province, which is expected to be the main event of today's protest against government's lack or slow process of creating new jobs for South Africans, most of them young South Africans. It's back to you, studio.
And Matuba also spoke with some of the leaders of the strike to hear their demands.
27% is unemployed, and 38% extended definition of unemployment are jobless. 10.7 million of young workers between 15 and 30 years are unemployed. 9.7 million economically active people are unemployed. Yet government and business have taken a short left on what we said in terms of retrenchment, moratorium on retrenchment.
We have to destroy the system of capitalism, which is the system of wage labor. That is the foundation of exploitation of workers. They must come to a system of socialism, the system that guarantees the well-being of everybody, the system that guarantees work, that respects labor, and that appreciates that labor is the most important wealth of society, not money, which is what the capitalist system does. And this is important action. We'll continue to support this. We hope workers can come more, can declare more of this kind of action in the future.
Social movements in Ecuador have begun a strike against the government's economic policies. The day of action began with protesters blocking roads in several Ecuadorian provinces. They are opposing cuts in public spending and the privatization of state enterprises. Workers at the CNT phone company occupied offices in the city of Esmeraldas. In the afternoon, several marches are expected to converge on the presidential palace in Quito. Caribbean community heads of government have made clear their stance of non-intervention in Venezuela. Citizens of the 15 CARICOM member states have been closely monitoring developments in the country. Our correspondent, Alison Ketnish, spoke to citizens in St. Lucia about this.
St. Lucia is celebrating its 40th anniversary of independence this month, and Venezuela was the first country to establish diplomatic relations with a then newly independent St. Lucia in 1979. As the country's first diplomatic ally, Venezuela has assisted St. Lucia in areas such as information technology through laptop donations, infrastructure resilience through initiatives such as the Alba Bridge, and cultural exchanges that include working visits by the Venezuelan National System of Orchestras. President Nicolas Maduro visited St. Lucia in 2015. The residents we spoke to say they have been closely following developments in Venezuela and they support calls for non-intervention.
The situation in Venezuela, what's going on in Venezuela, it's very tense. So what they have to do now, both sides put their heads together and solve the problem.
Citizens like John Quinlan say they are also against calls for fresh elections.
When you really check history, elections have never solved real problems. From since the death of Chavez, in fact, even since Chavez took power in Venezuela, which was one of the richest countries in South America, Venezuela has been a thorn in the American administration. And what is happening there now with the kind of government you have in America there right now, it's a very sad situation what has happened to Venezuela. But it is not simply elections.
For other citizens, the situation in Venezuela is a case of undue United States influence in the region.
I cannot support fresh elections. I believe what is actually happening, America want to dictate to the smaller countries, you know, that once I don't agree with you, they're going to put pressure on you and ask for regime change, which I believe is wrong. Within a democratic society, everyone has the right to cast their vote. So America, I don't support America, period, on this.
The people say they continue to follow developments in Venezuela, a country which has assisted St. Lucia for decades. They are hoping the situation can be resolved without outside interference. Alison Kentish, Telesur, St. Lucia.
Thousands of Nicaraguans have signed a petition of solidarity with the Venezuelan government at the National Palace of Culture. People showed their support for Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro and his government. They also strongly rejected the intervention of the U.S. and its allies in Venezuelan affairs. Venezuela's ambassador to Nicaragua, Javier Arrue, said that the Trump administration is only after his country's natural resources and oil reserves. He also said that the U.S. blockade has taken away more than $35 billion from Venezuela.
Today, we Nicaraguans show our solidarity, our firm convictions that we will overcome these threats together with Venezuela, the same way we survived an indirect intervention of the United States in the 80s. You see, we have already felt a similar threat on our own flesh, and that's why today and always we will show our solidarity with the Venezuelan people.
China's government has said that reports that diplomats held talks with Venezuela's opposition are false. This comes after the Wall Street Journal claimed that diplomats were concerned about oil projects in Venezuela.
In fact, the report is false. It's fake news. Recently, some media have been concocting some false information, and we don't know what their agenda is. We hope the relevant media can do news reporting based on objective and fair principles. In terms of recent Venezuela issue, we maintain that it should be resolved by a dialogue to seek a political solution.
During an interview with the Rio News Network, actor and activist Danny Glover criticized the U.S. over its actions against Venezuela. Glover singled out the so-called humanitarian aid.
Now what you've done is you've taken the billions of dollars that rightfully belong to the the Venezuelan people, and what you've done is you've taken those billions of dollars, you place sanctions on it. They can't use their own money, their own resources, and then you come with as like this. This armor, that knight in shining armor to save them and everything, with a few $1 million, some quote-unquote humanitarian aid, which we don't know where that money goes to. The danger that we have now and the danger that we see is a full-scale conflict which will just decimate not simply, people's, but simply the gains that were made by this action called the Bolivarian Revolution over the last 20 years. This is the attempt to kill that is what is on the table and had always been on the table.
Venezuela's Youth Day on Monday was marked by a show of civic-military alliance at the border with Colombia in the state of Táchira. This despite threats of disruption by some of the country's right wing. The opposition continues its attempts to bring in the so-called humanitarian aid from Colombia without government consent. They are using the aid trucks stationed at the border as fuel in an attempt to keep its right-wing base mobilized. Venezuelan troops say the continued civic-military presence on the bridge symbolizes a joint resistance to any coup attempt.
Our brothers of the whole world who listen to us, we are an independent and sovereign nation, and for this purpose we have here our militia, prepared and trained to defend our beloved homeland, Venezuela. Chavez lives, always loyal, traitors never.
And Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro has made a call once again for peace and dialogue in the country. During his speech for Youth Day celebrations at the Bolívar Square in Caracas, Maduro took a stand against military threats. He also denounced the imperialist intervention promoted by the U.S. administration.
We all want peace for Venezuela. We want the war drums to go away, the threats of a military invasion to go away, and that all Venezuela unites in a single voice. We want peace.
The Spanish parliament has rejected the government's budget, a move that will likely lead Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez to call for snap general elections. Sánchez holds a minority government and has relied on the support of Catalan nationalist parties against right-wing parties. But Catalan independence members have also rejected his budget. If called, the early elections would likely take place in mid-April. Our correspondent Adriana Cardoso has more from Madrid.
In Spain, the parliament has failed to approve the government's budget for 2019. It did not have the support of parties like the PP, the Citizens Party, nor the parties in favor of Catalan independence. This was a predictable outcome since last week when the relationship between the Spanish government and the Catalan independence parties ruptured, and the Spanish government needed the support of the independence movement to be able to pass this budget. After the vote, some leaders of the opposition, such as PP's Pablo Casado, demanded that Pedro Sánchez call elections as soon as possible. Within the Socialist Party, the Minister of Development, José Luis Abalos, said that news about elections could come shortly. Right now, there are three possible scenarios, though. The strongest is that there could be an election on the 14th or the 18th of April, which would have its advantages and disadvantages for PSOE. On the one hand, it would allow them to take advantage of the discourse generated by this vote that the right wing and the Catalan independence parties won't allow them to govern. But on the other hand, it's a very early date indeed, and they'd have to dissolve Parliament shortly to abide by the 54-day law to call elections. Once Parliament is dissolved, if they were to call elections for the 14th, they'd have to dissolve Parliament next Tuesday, February 29th. Another option is to call elections for Super Sunday, that is the 26th of May, so they would coincide with autonomous community elections, as well as the municipal and European elections. That date has not convinced some members of the PSOE party, who feel that it could work against them. That is the date, however, that the right wing are demanding, such as leader of the PP, Pablo Casado. Finally, the third option opened by the failure of the budget to pass is one of resistance, the path that Pedro Sánchez has taken throughout the past year, which would be to continue governing without his own budget, but with a renewal of the budget inherited from the government of Mariano Rajoy, and maybe allow him to put off elections until next October.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. The main opposition party in Nigeria has held a campaign rally in Lagos. Presidential candidate for the People's Democratic Party, Atiku Abubakar, and his running mate Peter Obi led the event. Nigeria will hold general elections this Saturday. The radical Islamic group Boko Haram has forced thousands of people to leave their homes in northeast Nigeria. Many have crossed the border into Cameroon to seek refuge. Boko Haram's jihadist insurgency began in 2009 and has cost 27,000 lives and forced more than 2 million others to flee. Cameroon's opposition leader Maurice Kamto has been charged with rebellion and insurrection, among other offenses that would carry a death penalty. The prosecutor's office of a military court filed the charges against Kamto and 28 of his supporters. He was arrested late January for organizing a small rally against the current long-serving president. But Kamto says he was cheated out of the presidency in last year's elections.
I call on the incumbent president of the Republic to organize the conditions for a peaceful transition of power in order to protect Cameroon from a post-electoral crisis that our country does not need.
An entire generation of Yemeni children could be lost due to continued malnutrition. That warning comes from the United Nations World Food Program. Yemen's nearly 4-year war has killed tens of thousands of people, and Saudi Arabia's blockade has brought millions more to the brink of famine. The UN is pushing for a ceasefire and troop withdrawal.
First of all, I think we will have needless loss of lives for these children that would have been acutely malnourished, and in the long term you would expect that the productivity of those children would really be affected because they would have grown without a proper nutrition base within their body. So in terms of being able to resist diseases and being productive, it's going to be very challenging. So it is key that we protect and save these children.
Because of the war, there isn't any transportation, there isn't any medical care, malnutrition throughout. It's like a famine. Kids all around the country are suffering.
A boot company in Zimbabwe has defied odds by operating fully. This while the country reels from the West's sanctions. The Courtney Boot Company is located in the once industrial hub of Bulawayo. It's increasing production to keep up with the increasing international demand for its products. That's even though sanctions imposed on Zimbabwe by Britain and US have resulted in an economic meltdown.
Employment, 99.9% unemployment. You see how difficult this is. It's lucky if you have a job, because most of the people don't have jobs. So when you find yourself employed, you know you are that one out of 100 who is lucky.
In Haiti, around 78 inmates have escaped from a prison in the southern part of the country, and another person has been killed during anti-government protest. They used the commotion from the protests outside the prison to escape. Protesters have been rallying against the economic situation and corruption in the country, demanding the president resigns.
We have to keep mobilizing until Jovenel Moïse and Jean-Henri Séant leave, and they should both go to jail. They are two criminal politicians that have the project of destroying the country.
Wildfires are approaching a residential area in the Chilean city of San Pedro de la Paz. Some residents have voluntarily evacuated from their homes as they fear the blaze will advance to their properties. At the same time, firefighters are trying to control the multiple fires in the southern Biobío region. And also in Chile, thousands of cuttlefish have washed up on the shore in the north of the country. Authorities are still investigating the cause but warn people not to eat the fish. Locals fear this is due to pollution and could damage the region's fishing industry. In 2018, various sea creatures, including whales, squid, and salmon, washed up at various beaches across the country. Scientists are still scouring through the remains of Brazil's National Museum, which was destroyed by a fire last September. Their goal is to recover ancient artifacts and to hopefully hold some of exhibitions with the remains. Around 20 million historical artifacts were burned in the fire. Its destruction led to criticism over the lack of public funds to protect the country's heritage.
Here you can see a series of cabinets that store scientific pieces, scientific samples. A part of this material was destroyed, but as you can see there are drawers that have been dated, and we are finding important scientific pieces that can be recovered for our collections.
Winter in Siberia is not something to take lightly, but for the dock workers of the Yakutsk shipyard is a vital season for their livelihood. With short Siberian summers, ships have to keep moving while the river is still passable. This means repairs must be done in the winter. Temperatures can drop as low as -50 degrees Celsius. An experienced worker can dig out 4 ships in one season. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us.
The Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines the mass media influence promoted by imperialism. Get access to the analysis of the socio-economic and political life of the whole South America on our screen and platform in English. A critical place committed to the truth to determine the major events that transform the world today. Mondays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Canada's Minister of Veterans Affairs has resigned from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's cabinet. Jody Wilson-Raybould's resignation comes as investigators look into whether the Prime Minister pressured her to help the company's SNC-Lavalin avoid criminal persecution. SNC-Lavalin is Canada's largest engineering company and it faces bribery charges. But the Trudeau government introduced agreements in 2018 that allow companies facing charges to avoid conviction if they cooperate. A national strike in Belgium has brought public transport to a halt, with airports and major railways closing down. Brussels Airlines cancelled all of its scheduled flights, while the National Railway Company said half of its nationwide trains would be cancelled. The strike comes as NATO ministers are set to meet in Brussels. A car bomb exploded at a checkpoint in the Syrian town of Al-Rai near the Turkish border. 3 policemen and 4 civilians were injured. The town of Al-Rai is an area controlled by Turkey-backed rebels. It was seized from the Islamic State in an operation launched in 2016. In Japan, the chief defense lawyer of former Nissan chairman Carlos Ghosn has resigned. The lawyer submitted his resignation on Wednesday, but no reason was given for his departure. Local media reports that Ghosn had already hired another lawyer to replace the previous one. The ex-Nissan boss was detained in Tokyo in November on charges of under-reporting his salary. A Japanese lesbian couple is demanding the right to get married. Chuo Saoe and Yoko Ogawa have been together for 25 years, and they are aware the marriage registration they filed in Tokyo's town hall will be rejected. So, along with other 12 gay couples, they will file lawsuits on Valentine's Day. They say the non-recognition of same-sex marriage is unconstitutional.
I have always felt some exasperation to the fact that lesbians and gays don't have the freedom to choose to get married or not.
I want to loudly say again in this country that love, equality, and freedom are an integral part of human rights.
Construction is still ongoing for the 2020 Olympic Games in Tokyo, as the new national stadium is set for completion in November of this year. A total of 1.3 billion was spent on the massive grounds located in Shinjuku. The last time the Japanese held the Olympic Games was in 1964. It is hoped that the new national stadium could eventually be converted into a football stadium. And before we leave, Telesur released a song as part of the collaborative international campaign, Tambores de la Paz para Venezuela, or Drums of Peace for Venezuela. It's a message of peace and solidarity to Venezuela.
Raúl Torres is a Cuban singer and composer considered one of the most outstanding interpreters of the Cuban New Trova musical style. The artist is a composer of such songs as Candil de Nieve, Se Fue, Regrésamelo Todo, El Regreso del Amigo, The Return of the Friend, dedicated to the commander Hugo Chavez, among others. For this occasion, Torres expresses his support and respect for Venezuela. That's why he wrote Tambores de la Paz, Drums of Peace. It gives us a breath of hope in the face of constant aggression from the United States and threats of war. We must learn to live with those who do not understand us, to have a future where we can breathe. So expresses the lyrics of the song, where Torres collaborated with other musicians. The song is part of the campaign called Tambores de Paz para Venezuela, Drums of Peace for Venezuela. The initiative seeks the participation of the people as a show of integration and solidarity with the Bolivarian nation.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And for our viewers in Africa, remember you can find us on StarSat, channel 461 in South Africa, and channel 539 in Nigeria. And join us on social media as well, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.